In this video, we're going to talk about implementing the repository layer or the data layer using the ideas of clean architecture. For those of you that haven't seen the previous video, we are implementing a simple e-commerce application where we have some features like adding a product to the wish list and also adding a product to the shopping cart. So now let's dive into it and see how the repository layer is implemented. In the previous videos, we have talked about the domain layer, and there I explained why the product repository is actually part of your domain and not the data layer. So in this product repository, it's defined the contract of how your application is going to retrieve that data. It doesn't really contain the implementation details because that is part of your data layer, but it defines the contract of how it's going to be fetched. The domain layer doesn't really care where your data is coming from, as long as it is fulfilling this contract that is defined right here. So now let's see how this is implemented. So this is the implementation of the repository. The first thing I want to talk about is about this class right here, a product. So this is how I define a product in the domain layer, and this is very important. This is part of your domain layer, this class right here. So this class is defining how we are going to represent a product in the app according to your domain, according to your business. So we're going to have a title, description is going to be string, and the price is going to be a double. But now in the repository layer, we have to add a different object to represent a product. As you can see, this repository is actually fetching data from an API. So I have here the definition of my API. I'm using retrofit. And if you check the definition of the API, you can see that I'm returning a list of product entity. And as you can see, the product entity is very similar to the product, but they are two different things, and they should be two different things according to the ideas of clean architecture. Because imagine that right now you're using this API, right? And for some reason, maybe someone from the business, a manager, decides that you're not going to use this API anymore. They're going to use maybe a different API or a different service to fetch a list of product. And now let's say that this ID is not called ID anymore, it's called identification. And yeah, let's say that the price is no longer a double, but that's a string, right? So imagine that you're using this product entity in all the layers of the application. So you're using that in the presentation layer, in your fragments, in your view model, in your use cases. So when that changes, this is going to affect all the classes of your application. Pretty much all the layers of your application now have to change because a very small thing, I would say. And that's not very good. When that happens, you break the idea of separation of concerns, which is the main focus of the clean architecture. And also you have to change a lot of things for something that shouldn't affect your code that much. That's why we need two different entities, because when changes like that happens, then the only thing that is going to change is actually the place or in the repository or any other class that you're using to map. But that's the only place where it's going to change. So for example, right here, it says it gets a compile error because now it was required a double and now it changed to a string. So all I have to do is convert to whatever it was before. So double. Probably there are better ways to do it, but just to explain the idea. So as you can see, now we're done. All the changes that was required for a new backend with a new data types, it was all included and encapsulated here. So all the changes, they are not going to propagate to your view model, they are not going to propagate to your fragment, because you have this product and this product hasn't changed and it will not change when you change the backend. So this is the first thing that I want to talk about, the repository. So whenever you're creating your repository, and you want to follow this idea of clean architecture and really have a good separation of concerns, make sure that you have two objects, one for your domain and one for your database, or for your backend, or for your whatever service you're using or data source that you're using. Now let's talk about using different repositories to fetch or to fulfill the contract that was defined in the domain. First, I'm gonna remove those changes and let's go to different branch. So now I have the same. I have one repository that's called wishlist repository, and now I want to show you how easy it is when you have this the separation of concerns. So when you use when your repository is an interface, then it's very easy to have different implementations of that repository. So let me show you. In this case, we have a database and the shared preferences. So for this feature right here, which is the wish list, I have two repositories. One for one that I'm using a database with room. As you can see here, this is the implementation of the repository. So it's implementing the interface, and that is using room. And the other implementation is actually using a shared preferences. So in the shared preferences, I get a product ID and I save in the shared preferences, and in the repository that is using the database, I'm saving using room. So we can easily see which implementation is being used by checking our module. And as we can see here in our module, right now I'm using the shared preferences repository. But if I want to change, it's super easy. All I have to do is just provide a different implementation or a different dependency, which in this case is the database. So instead of using the wishlist shared preference, I can use the wishlist database repository. And just like that, since I was using a contract, since I was using an interface, my domain didn't change, my presentation also didn't change, but now I'm using a different implementation of the repository. So before I was using the shared preferences, and now I'm using the database, and I'm going to show that a big change, I would say, like that, it's very easy to accomplish. And just like that, now we're using a different repository for our application. So imagine it was super easy to change from shared preference to use a database. And one of the reasons why we could do that is because our view model and our business, they were not relying on the implementation details of a repository, but they were relying on an interface. And when you do that, you can easily change the implementation of this interface without affecting the other layers of your application. So this is what I wanted to share about implementing the repository layer. If you want to learn more about how that is done, you can check out this project. The link is in the description of this video. And again, if you find this video useful, please hit the like button and also the subscribe, because that helps a lot. And in the next videos, we're going to talk about unit testing and how to write unit tests for your project.